me start the recording. Welcome to our Unit 7 live session. That's right, we're 7 weeks into the semester. We're basically halfway through the semester. It's gone by, I don't know, maybe it's gone by super slowly for you, but it feels like it's been going quickly for me. I'm impressed at everything y'all have been doing. This week, we're talking about 2 new different types of arguments, causal arguments related to cause and effect, and we're starting our section on arguments from authority. Not only are we going to be talking about arguments from authority this week, we'll also be discussing them next week, where we're looking at 2 new different types of arguments from authority. But that's all, whatever. Let's now talk just about the basic logistics for this class. I'll pull up our Blackboard course page as we always do. So here we are on Blackboard. I'm going to head to course content first. I've already graded your Unit 6 stuff. Anybody who posted in the discussion board for Unit 6, I've given you a grade for that. Remember, you only had to post 1 time. And then we'll be discussing that in a minute. The Unit 6 participation activity, I also gave you not any feedback on it, but I graded it based off of whether you did it or didn't do it. But I did post an answer sheet on there. So you can take a look on Blackboard at this answer sheet to see how your answers compare to the actual answers. Wait, is this only 1 page? It's supposed to be 3 pages. Weird. I guess it's taking its sweet time to load, maybe? There it is. Great, it's all there. Cool. All right, so that's some basic logistics about what's where and how to get to stuff. Huzzah, huzzah. I also graded people's extra credits for anybody who handed in the extra credit. For most of you, it was worth up to 15 points extra credit, but most of you got maybe like, I don't know, somewhere between 7 points and 15 points. I think like a lot of people got somewhere around 10, 11, or 12 points extra credit. I graded it partly on whether you did them, and then partly on how well you did on each of them. So probably you got somewhere between 10 to 12 points is my guess on it. So that's all just stuff we were discussing last week. This week, if I can go to the Unit 7 folder, let's talk about both what we're learning and what is the assignments for this week. So here are the 2 slides we're using in class this week, and we'll also be doing an activity in the second half of class today. The activity is right there. This is an ungraded activity, but we're just going to do it. We have 2 readings for class this week, one on causal arguments, that is arguments related to cause, and another one is an argument from authority reading, only 4 pages. So, I hope. Did I not share? Sorry, I thought I shared. I've been going over Blackboard this whole time, but you've just been looking at me. Sorry, I swear I shared with you. I don't know what happened. Let me try one more time.
It was sharing, but it just disappeared.
I don't know why it disappeared. Well, that's creepy because I just went back to see. Anyway, I'm back. It's back. So weird. Blackboard's acting funny today. Shantae, that's like the understatement of the year. I feel like Blackboard's always acting funny, but maybe just particularly today. Yeah, these are the two articles, as I was mentioning, we're reading for class this week. There are some optional resources as well. Both of these are videos if you want to take a look at either of these videos. They're short. I think both are like 5 to 10 minutes long, not super long. All right, so here's the graded stuff for class this week. You've got a discussion board post, and you've got a participation activity. That's it. This thing at the bottom here is an ungraded assignment. You're not going to have to hand this in. It's nothing, so don't worry about that. The discussion post is like we've been doing the past few times. I'm asking you to only post once in this forum. I've tried to downgrade it so that you're not posting 3 times a week. Instead, you're only posting 1 time a week. And it's the same for this one. All you have to do is write 1 post. You do not have to reply to anyone else. And that post is due by Wednesday. And it's on things we'll be learning in class this week related to causal arguments, arguments about cause and effect. And it's basically asking you to think about two types of criticisms of causal claims or causal generalizations. Read both of these people's responses to the idea that smoking causes cancer, and then try to respond to both of them. How would you respond to what this person says? How would you respond to what this other person says? That's all you have to do for your discussion post. The participation activity is on the first type of argument we'll be learning about in class today. Arguments related to cause and effect. These are called causal arguments. There are a total of 8 cause and effect arguments on here. You just have to evaluate each one of them based off of the way we're learning how to evaluate these causal arguments. Again, since it's a participation activity, you're only going to be graded on whether you do it or you don't do it. It's completion-based, not perfection-based. And that one is also due Wednesday. Oh, I guess I didn't write on here that it's due Wednesday. I'll do that later. But the deadline for everything is Wednesday, not only for this discussion board post, but also for this participation activity. I'll get to editing that after class today. So that's everything grade-wise. Questions, thoughts, concerns about anything related to class at this time? Feel free to write nope in the chat. If you don't have questions, feel free to hit that raise hand button and I can call on you, or you can write your question in the chat. All right, so it looks like most of y'all don't have questions. Cool. So I thought before we dove into learning new arguments in class today, I thought it might make sense to go over some of the things you did as assignments last class. So I wanted to go over maybe 1 or 2 arguments on this evaluating inductive arguments participation activity. And then maybe go over 1 or 2 arguments on this argument by analogy extra credit. So I don't know, feel free to shout out in the chat or post or raise your hand or just unmute yourself to let me know if there's a particular argument on here you definitely want to go over. I think we went over argument number 10 in class last week. I forget what other one, if any, we went over last class. I forget. Did we go over argument number 3 maybe? I don't remember. But I thought maybe, why don't we go over this argument right here, argument number 6, since nobody's piping up with their own thoughts about this. So argument number 6 looks like this. Oh, maybe somebody did pipe in. We did the last 2 last week. Oh, I forgot. I didn't realize we went with, what was it? 10 and 11. Oh, yeah, we did the starting quarterback. That's right. Awesome. So cool. I'm glad that you're saying 6 is tricky because it's one of the reasons why I would like to go over it. All right, so let's think through this. The argument goes as follows. Brandon Rush averaged around 13 points a game between 2005 and 2008 playing college basketball at Kansas. He went to the University of Kansas. So I expect him to average 13 points a game when he plays in the National Basketball Association this year, the professional league for basketball players in the United States. So what do you think is the sample of this argument? So Brandon Rush is the person we're talking the whole time, but we're trying to talk more specifically about one type of sample about Brandon Rush. Which part of this entire argument is listing the sample? Lamar gets it really nicely here. The particular average of 13 points in college between 2005 and 2008 playing college basketball. All this here is his sample. So in this particular case, we're going to think about the sample in terms of games. All the games Rush played in college from 2005 to 2008, which, there we go. It's those games that are the sample. Now let's think about the overall population that we're now generalizing about. What are we generalizing in general now about Brandon Rush in this argument? Point to the particular part of this that the conclusion seems to be about. What's our overall population? So Shanae says college basketball. I don't think we're generalizing about college basketball specifically. That's our evidence. Remember, our evidence is our sample, but our generalization is what's going beyond the sample. So Lamar and Isabel say it's Brandon Rush in the NBA. And I agree. In this particular case, we're talking about what's happening in the conclusion of this argument. We're saying we're expecting that he'll average 13 points a game when he plays in the NBA this year. So that seems to be our overall population. And I guess in this case, it's more of a prediction rather than an overall population. But the games Rush will play in the NBA this year. That seems to be what's going on here. Now, we're ready to discuss whether we've got a large enough sample or whether it's not a large enough sample. Notice that the numbers aren't actually given to us. We don't know how many games he's played between 2005 and 2008. We also don't know how many games Rush might play in the NBA this year. We don't know those exact numbers. But fortunately, we have the internet at our disposal. We can do some research to try to at least estimate, if not get the exact number for both of these. So did anybody actually go out and look up how many games Brandon Rush played between the years of 2005 to 2008? Did any of y'all do that? This was no, Lamar definitely didn't. This is a 3-year period. He played in 2005 and 2006. A basketball season always is one of those like fall or like, I guess like maybe November to March type of activity. So it spans 2 years. 2005, 2006 was 1 year. 2006, 2007 was another year. 2007, 2008 was a 3rd year. So this is 3 years worth of games. Does anyone know, roughly speaking, how many games college basketball players play in a given season? In one season of college basketball, does anyone know roughly how many games someone would play? Najua's like, this is just not my thing. I'm not a college basketball fan. Franco guesses 20. He's got a question mark behind it, so it suggests that's a guess. Lamar's going with 50 to 60, but he's saying, I'm going to say, so that's also sounding like a guess. Ashley says 13 with another question mark. William says 82 with another question mark. 82 is relevant to this, but college basketball players don't play 82 games a season. Pro players play 82 basketball games a season. The NBA traditionally, in most seasons, plays 82 games every season. Franco says in high school, we're going to go with 20. Nashua goes with 12. Facundo says 84 games. I think it's actually 82 games for the NBA. I love that we're all trying to guess here. This is the sort of thing that is readily available online. So I'm just going to pull this up on the old computer right now. I'm going to just type in Brandon Rush college stats. And we can see there's going to be some sort of website like this, like sportprints.com, that's just going to list his stats. And now this is where you have to like learn some sort of like terminology here. But G stands for games, how many games he's played. And it was 109 games. PTS stands for points. So there was 13.6 points per game. TRB stands for total rebounds per game. AST stands for assists, and then all these other things. But it looks like the thing we really care about is games. And he's got 109 games. So little side note, on any given season, a college basketball team is going to play somewhere around 30 to 40 games. If you're particularly good on a good team, you might play more games because you'll get into the postseason tournament or a postseason tournament. And the more games you win in that postseason tournament, the more games you will play. So there we go. We've got at least a top number for this, 109. And notice how easy that was to just look up. Sometimes you got to do some background research to find out the answer to some of these questions. And there's a little background research for you. Sorry that this is so sports-based, but like the very least in the back of your mind, you should be thinking like, oh yeah, sports-based nonsense. They got all sorts of stats on that. So right now, our current sample is 109 college games relative to, those are the examples, relative to what? I guess I should do this here, a little slash here. The overall population is the number of games that Rush is going to play in the NBA this year. So Shanae's going with 13. You're still thinking in terms of points, but remember, this is about games. We're focused here on games each particular time. So it's not the amount of points he's averaging. What it is the amount of evidence we have towards that points he's averaging. So Isabel, I think, nails it here. In a typical NBA season, it's going to be 82 games. And that, by the way, is at most, because in the past season, the most recent season, the NBA did not get to play all 82 games. Because of COVID, the season was shut down for a while, and there's confusion and talk about what's going to happen this upcoming NBA season. Some people think that there's going to be a shortened NBA season this coming year because this most recent season lasted so long with a large break in the middle due to the pandemic. They're pushing back this particular upcoming NBA season. So we would say at most 82 games. So what do you all think in terms of a sample? If you have a sample of 109 and you're trying to make a generalization about 82, is that large enough? Shanae's going with yes. What do the rest of y'all say? Are y'all with Shanae thinking this is a large enough sample? Lamar's going with yes. Olivia's and Najua's going with yes. Everyone's going with yes. I would say in this particular circumstance, this is a large enough sample for sure. Now, let's ask the other question. Is this sample representative? The sample over here is all the games he played in college versus the overall population we're generalizing about, all the games he's going to play in the NBA. So Lamar says, no, this is not representative. And I think I agree with Lamar. I do not think this is a representative sample. Why not? Lamar, why is this not a representative sample? Or anybody, speak on behalf of Lamar. Speak up and try to defend Lamar's point here. Why isn't this a representative sample? Why not? So Lamar mentions competition level. I think this is really important. I think college is very different from the NBA, right? The level of competition in college basketball is a lower level of competition than the level of competition in the pros. There are probably thousands, if not tens of thousands, of college basketball players. If you think about how many colleges there are in the United States and how many basketball players are on any individual college team, we're talking about tens of thousands of athletes playing college basketball every year. You know how many basketball players are in the pros? Well, there are like 30 professional NBA teams. There are like 12 players, maybe 14 players per team. So 30 times 12 or 14, you're talking about a very small number. Fewer than 500 players ever get into the NBA. And as Lamar writes in the chat here, we're comparing college basketball to professionals. That's a big difference. Just because somebody's performing particularly decently, 13 points a game in college, doesn't mean that's a good representation of how that player will perform in the pros. College versus pros is a big different level. Are two different levels. How you perform at one might not represent how you perform at the other. Your college performance may not represent your pro performance. So that's a really important point. Excellent. That's the key flaw in this particular argument. If you want to know how well Brandon Rush is going to do this year in the NBA, you might want to look at his NBA stats. How many points a game does Brandon Rush average in the NBA? And that might tell you how well he'll do this coming season, whether he'll average 13 points a game this year or not. So let's go back to our little stat board and check out our sportsreference.com to see whether we can find Brandon Rush's NBA stats. So rather than college stats, I'll type in Brandon Rush NBA stats. And now we're going to go to basketballreference.com. And in his career, he's played 481 games. He's only averaged 6.8 points a game, not 13.6 points. So that suggests that that's a much better representation of what Brandon Rush might do this particular year. Should also point out, by the way, how old and potentially outdated it's are. That argument was talking about Brandon Rush in 2005 to 2008. That's 15 to 12 years ago. That's some old, potentially outdated statistics. I think a much more reliable set of statistics would be how he's maybe performed in the last 5 years. So rather than looking at Brandon Rush's entire career, why don't we scroll down and take a look at his yearly stats, how he did in 2008, 2009, 2010, etc. And the more recent we can check out, like these 2 seasons, that might be a better indication. And if we look at it, 2015 to 2017, he wound up scoring only 4.2 points on a given season. In those combined, he was 4.2 points. And I think you should also notice something really, really important about this. He hasn't even played in the NBA these past 3 years. In the 2017-2018 season, he did not play. In the 2018-2019 season, he did not play. In the 2019-2020 season, he did not play. That's probably even more relevant. The chances of Brandon Rush actually playing in the NBA, since he hasn't been in the NBA the past 3 years, are pretty damn low. So if I had to guess based off of the most recent stats we have for Brandon Rush, I would expect Brandon Rush to average 0 points a game in the NBA this year, because I wouldn't think that Brandon Rush is even in the NBA anymore. That seems to be the most recent, most updated, most relevant representative stats. So when you ask, could we compare his first 108 games? I think that's less relevant than comparing his most recent 108 games. And in his most recent 108 games of the NBA season, he hasn't played at all. Questions, thoughts, concerns about this one? Notice how much you have to do some outside research to answer some of the questions on these participation activities. All right, any other one on here you're dying to know the answer to? You want to just go over and discuss what other ones you're like, I want to talk about that. We already did 10 and 11. Anyone want to go over 9 or 8? Maybe you want to check out 7 or something on the first page. So that asks, for the arguments that are based on me, one starting with I, would you include overall population? So in this case, it really depends on what we're talking about. So let's take a look at argument number 5. Number 5 is not talking about a population of people. In this case, sample is not me and James Corden or something like that. It's the fact that every time I'm watching TV and James Corden is on it, I wind up falling asleep. So it's all these past instances of me watching TV and falling asleep. That's my sample. So in one sense, I am part of the sample, and then I would be part of the population. But in another sense, it's not completely accurate to say I am the sample. Not counting up numbers of people. The individual examples I'm using are individual times when I've fallen asleep watching you. That sample is a little bit different. But for what it's worth, if you have anything in your sample, it's also going to be part of your overall population, because a sample is a subset of the overall population. So I'm trying to think of other examples where I might be in there. So this one about I checked Instagram feed. This is another one where the sample is not about me. The sample isn't even my friends. The sample is about my friends' Instagram posts. That's to be the sample in this particular case. And the overall population in this circumstance is actual quality of lives that my friends have. So this is another example where the sample and overall population might be hard to determine, hard to figure out. But the sample is the snapshot of your friends' lives that you see in the photos they post on Instagram versus the overall population of your friends' actual quality of life in general. Another one where you as a person, the I in that argument doesn't even factor in the sample or the overall population. So it's weird to talk about population, because usually when you think about population, you're thinking about people, like how many people live in Kenya, or how many humans voted for Barack Obama in 2012, something like that. But when we're talking about samples and population, sometimes we mean games. That's the population talking about. Sometimes we mean football hits. Sometimes we mean expensive stuff I've bought in the past, right? All of these are different types of samples and different types of populations. And we shouldn't just think that they're about people populations. They're about event populations or example populations, something along the lines of that. All right, so maybe we can now turn to the discussion board post from this week. Let's switch over to the internet browser here and take a look in Unit 6 right here, if I can scroll down, to this particular question. Are cardiologists immoral? So when you read the first part of this, and there was a nice interesting split here, you might get the sense that cardiologists are bad people. So the entire evidence here, I don't know if I can make this bigger. I'll try to make this a little bit bigger so you can all see it. Shows just link after link after link of bad cardiologists. So here's an example of a Maryland cardiologist who's performed over 500 dangerous, unnecessary surgeries. A separate Maryland cardiologist performed 25 unnecessary surgeries. A California cardiologist did several hundred dangerous, unnecessary surgeries, so much so that they got raided by the FBI. Someone in Philly did the same. Someone in North Carolina did the same. 11 separate cardiologists did the same. And by the way, you can click on all of these links, and they're linked to real articles where you can just read one of these. 400 patients have sued Kentucky hospital and 11 cardiologists over unnecessary procedures. This isn't just BS that people are making up. These are real news events that have happened. A Michigan cardiologist. And it's not just about dangerous, unnecessary surgeries. There's also a cardiologist who's committed insurance fraud, a cardiologist who was caught in a kickback scheme, a cardiologist who had some research data falsification conspiracies. There's just a variety of different ways cardiologists can be bad at their job in this unprofessional, immoral way. But then there's also sexual harassment, The head of Yale cardiology was caught up in a sexual harassment scandal and fired. A Stanford cardiologist was charged with sexually harassing students. Same for Baltimore cardiologists, and LA cardiologists fined for groping texts. 3 different Pennsylvania cardiologists were harassing the same woman. An Arizona cardiologist was suspended on 19 different counts. One of the world's leading cardiologists was fired for sexual harassment. A New York cardiologist refused to pay his bill at a strip club. A Manhattan cardiologist was caught taking naked pictures of patients, then using them to sexually abuse employees. Another New York cardiologist was secretly installing spy cams in an office bathroom. A Florida cardiologist was falsely accused of sexual harassment as part of a feud with another cardiologist. And so there's a lot of bad people doing a lot of bad things. And then there's also even weirder sorts of crimes, like a Texas cardiologist who's guilty of child molestation, a California cardiologist who murdered a child. The author of one of the world's top cardiologist textbooks was arrested because of something related to child pornography and cocaine. And then there's an Australian cardiologist who was fighting extradition to Uganda. He was accused of terrorism, robbery, and murdering 7 people. And a Long Island cardiologist who hired an assassin to kill a rival cardiologist. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence that cardiologists are bad people in this way. And yet, a bunch of you said you thought this entire article was not presenting good evidence that cardiologists are bad people. And for what it's worth, I'm on your side. For everybody who has said, you know what, this was actually a great amount of evidence. This was good evidence for this conclusion. Why not? Because we had a bunch of people who said, like, yeah, I'm convinced. It was like roughly half of you said, like, I think this is good. I'm convinced. Boo cardiologists, they're bad people. But a bunch of you, about half of you said, you know, no, I don't think this is good evidence. I don't think he's made a good case at this point. So Shante says it only took samples from the US. There was one Australian cardiologist in that whole bunch, but it was mostly people from the US. So if we concluded, Shante, that cardiologists from the US are bad people, Leah says this doesn't represent all cardiologists. Well, so you're saying in some case that this is not representative. That's interesting. Why isn't this representative? I mean, think about all the examples in this article that we just had. Think about how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now add 11, we're up to 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. This is 3, so that's 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. We've got 39 cardiologists examples. And so a couple of things that people are saying in the chat here. Lamar, the author's picking only the most extreme cases fit his agenda. In this case, it's a guy named Scott Alexander. Facundo says it's a very biased selection. So we're only choosing to focus on bad cardiologists in these articles that are linked to. There aren't articles about good cardiologists. And as Shantae's saying, it's only a few out of thousands of cardiologists. So I think Shantae actually looked at the number of cardiologists in her post. Do you remember, Shantae, how many cardiologists there are in the United States? Because we had, as I said, an example of 39. I guess if we remove the Australian, we can go with 38 examples of cardiologists. That's 38 out of a population. Facundo's got it as well. It's roughly 23,000 cardiologists, professional working heart surgeons in the United States today. So 39 or 38 might feel like an overwhelming number of examples. Again, relative to the overall population of 23,000 cardiologists, 38 is a tiny little drop in the bucket. That is, for sure, the amount of bad cardiologists, immoral cardiologists, we would expect there to be just by random chance alone. Just like there are just that many bad people in any realm. population that size. You gather me 23,000 people, I bet there's going to be 30 or 40 of them that are bad. 30 or 40 of them that are convicted of particularly heinous actions. That just seems to be the base rate of expectation we would have. And this sort of generalizes in following sort of way. A lot of people like to argue by giving anecdotes, by saying, I can tell you story after story after story of these people behaving this way. And so now I'm going to generalize about it. That is not in of itself a good way to argue. It's attempting an inductive argument, but it's got two flaws to it that you all did a very nice job of saying. Shantae's point seems to be the idea that it's too small of a sample. And it's true. It's just too small a sample. Even if you got a bunch of examples, all they amount to is what's called anecdotal evidence. And we'll be discussing that later in class today, what amounts to anecdotal evidence. That's just strong enough. That's just not a big enough sample. The other thing is that typically we're dealing with, in our small sample, an unrepresentative biased subset of the population. Criminal cardiologists are not necessarily representative of all cardiologists. If you just took a random sample of 39 cardiologists out of all the cardiologists in the United States, I doubt that most of them would be criminals convicted of some sort of crime or other. Most of them would probably be just boring, everyday people without any criminal record. And maybe some of them would have a criminal record, but certainly not 38 out of the 39 that you selected. It seems like the person creating this article purposefully was looking to find examples of bad cardiologists, was cherry picking examples of bad cardiologists. And this is a general feature of the news. The news only reports stories of weird, unlikely, surprising news events, right? There aren't going to be that many stories about a cardiologist who spent 30 years working as a cardiologist and never got in trouble. That's not the sort of story that makes a lot of news that you can find in news articles. But a cardiologist who pleads guilty to child molestation, that's going to make the news. So the news, almost by definition, is presenting an unrepresentative perspective on the world. It's only presenting us with the surprising information about the world. It's not presenting us with the boring everyday base rate of things. So this is something really important to think about when we think about the news in general. The news is probably accurate and reliable, but it also is a distortion of how representative the news winds up being. How representative the sort of events that you see on the news winds up being. So I'm glad we talked through this. I really like all of the insightful ways that you criticized this argument. And for anybody who read past this, you'll know that this particular author was doing this on purpose. This particular author was using this example as just a random sort of job that he picked and coming up with all sorts of this, all sorts of bad apples in there. Cardiologists are wonderful people who, as far as I know, are no less ethical than any other profession. I chose to pick on them at random. Well, not quite at random. One of them yelled at him the other day. But I don't think anyone has ever claimed that there's any general issues with cardiologists. As far as I know, there's evidence for such. But if you read part 1 of this post and found yourself nodding along thinking, wow, cardiologists are real creeps. There must be some serious structural problems in the cardiology profession. Something must be done about them. Consider it evidence that a sufficiently motivated individual could make you feel that way about almost any large group of people. We could have done this not about cardiologists, but endocrinologists. or podiatrists. We could have done this just about high school math teachers. We could have done this just about priests, just about name your job of choice, name your type of person of choice. You want to paint a particular group of people in a bad light? If that group of people is sufficiently large enough, like 30,000 people or so, you'll probably have dozens of examples of bad people within that subgroup that you could pull from as evidence to paint an unrepresentative bad portrait of them. All right. I like this one as an example. Now what I would like to do is finally get to some new stuff for class today. I want to talk about one of the two new types of arguments we're going to be learning about, and that is the type of argument called, I can find it, where are you at? It is slide 8, where are you at? There it is, causal arguments. Here we go. Cool. I'm going to make these big. I love a nice slideshow. Let me now pull this up. There we go. Now it's full screen. So one first thing I'm going to say about causal arguments, if you're like me, you can't help but read that word, causal, at the bottom there, as the word casual. The word causal means related to cause and effect. The word casual is just flipping the U and the S, and everybody, myself included, probably has this tendency, because you see the word casual more often than the word causal, to read that as casual. We aren't talking about casual arguments, easy breezy arguments. We're talking about cause and effect in this class. So let's talk a little bit about what a causal argument looks like. The very general way of describing a causal argument is concluding that one event causes another event because those two events are correlated. So if I wanted to spell this out using some of the stuff we were doing last class when we were dealing with arguments by analogy, that you say that there are these two events. We could maybe call these events variables that are correlated. And that means that X probably causes Y. Again, we're using variables for this. These events are correlated, so the one event probably causes the other. By correlated, we mean that these two events just keep occurring together at a rate higher than we would expect by chance alone. A correlation in this sense is a genuine statistical pattern. We notice something that can't be explained as just random luck. It's some pattern that's occurring at a higher frequency, at a higher rate than we would expect by mere chance. Another word for correlation, by the way, is a generalization. So you can think of these correlations as like the conclusions of inductive arguments. Remember when we said that most dogs bark? That was based off of all of our evidence of examples of dogs barking. That's an example of a correlation. When we say most dogs bark, we're saying dogs and barking are correlated. Dogs is our X, barking is our Y. That's a generalization. Any type of conclusion to any type of inductive argument is making some sort of correlating claim, a claim of a correlation. By the way, other words for correlation include association. These two events are associated with each other, or regularity. We notice a regularity between these two events, or maybe a pattern, right? That's the way we were describing generalizations when we discussed inductive arguments last week. So notice that causal arguments almost start where inductive arguments end, because our premise in a causal argument is a generalization or a correlation, whereas the conclusion of an inductive argument is that generalization. Let's say you have a genuinely good inductive argument. This is, in causal terms, the way to start reasoning beyond that and say, now that I know that there's this generalization, that there's this correlation, I'm going to try to see what causes that. What's the explanation, the causal explanation for that correlation? All right, so another way of thinking about a correlation is it's the opposite of a coincidence. A coincidence might be a pattern, but it's more like what we would call a fake pattern as opposed to a genuine statistical pattern. When we're dealing with a coincidence, we're talking about a pattern that we could explain as the result of just plain random luck. We're talking about the sort of thing where, like, maybe you got 4 tails in a row when you flipped a coin 4 times. If you flip a coin 4 times and it comes up tails 4 times in a row, you might think to yourself, whoa, weird, that's cool, I can't believe that happened. But also, that's totally coincidental. That's the sort of thing that you could expect would happen by random chance and pure random chance alone. On the other hand, if you flipped a coin 1,000 times and you got 1,000 tails in a row, that feels way more like a genuine correlation and not merely a coincidence. At that point, I would say, there's something funky about this coin. This is probably some sort of rigged coin that's rigged to always land tails up in some sort of way. That's less likely to be a coincidence. So that's one important thing to think through. And when we're saying that a correlation can't be explained as just random luck, we're saying we have to explain it some other way. And so that's why we go to the idea of cause and effect. Genuine correlations require explanations in terms of cause and effect. Why is it that X and Y keep happening together? Maybe X causes Y, or maybe there's some other way to explain this. But it's got to be in terms of cause and effect. The core idea behind this is that generalizations of this sort don't just happen by random chance. When you've got a genuine statistical pattern, you need something above and beyond, oh, no, it just happened that way, to explain that correlation. And you need to reference cause and effect for this. So in a cause and effect argument, what you might say as an added missing sort of hidden premise in all of these causal arguments is there's no other plausible way to explain the correlation aside from saying that X causes Y. So now let's talk about what it means to say that X probably causes Y. First off, notice the word probably. We're still in the land of non-deductive. We're not saying this argument proves with 100% certainty its conclusion. We're only saying the conclusion is probably true, has a high percent chance of being true, has a high likelihood, is plausible, not the sort of claim that's definite. Second, the word cause is this claim about bringing about an effect. When we're saying X as the cause causes Y the effect, we're saying the cause brings about the effect. X brings about Y. The cause makes the effect happen. X makes Y happen. We're saying if X hadn't happened, Y wouldn't have happened. If the cause had not happened, the effect would not have happened. This is a dependency claim when we're dealing with cause and effect. The existence of the effect depends on the existence of the cause. There's that dependency claim. And it's asymmetric, right? X has got to happen for Y to come about. Y wouldn't have happened without X. That's a dependency. Whereas in our premise with a correlation, we're only dealing with frequency. We're just these two things keep happening roughly around the same time over and over and over and over again. So it's not an asymmetric relationship when we talk about correlations. We're not saying X depends on Y when we talk about correlation, or Y depends on X when we're talking about correlation. We're just saying they keep frequently popping up together. We're just noticing the pattern. So our conclusion in a causal argument is in some way going beyond the correlation evidence we have. It's making a stronger dependency style claim that says X probably came first and that caused Y to come about. Y's existence depended on X happening in the first place. All right, so let's do some examples of this now just to make sure. I've been talking about this in a very vague, abstract level. So this is a legitimate correlation that's out there. The percentage of habitual smokers with lung cancer is much higher than the percentage of non-smokers with lung cancer. So many people conclude from this that smoking probably causes lung cancer. This is an example of a causal argument. We've got some variables that are being correlated here, an X and a Y. You tell me, post in the chat, raise your hand. What's our X and Y in this argument? What are the two things we're correlating in this particular causal argument? What are the things we're correlating here? Leah's got one of them, smoking, and Isabel's got the other one, the development of lung cancer. Absolutely. Nice. Smoking and lung cancer. Those are our X and our Y. The correlation in this case happens in the first sentence. The percentage of smokers is higher, smokers with lung cancer is higher than the percentage of non-smokers with lung cancer. That's a correlation, something we wouldn't expect by random chance alone. We would expect the rates to be roughly the same, somewhere close to each other, just by random chance alone. And then our cause and effect conclusion is in the conclusion. Obviously, the word cause is right there. Smoking probably causes lung cancer. All right, if we were to kind of put this in nice, neat premise conclusion form, the way we have to the left here, it would be like this. Smoking and lung cancer are correlated. There's no other good way to explain this correlation. So smoking probably causes lung cancer. This is in fact the argument we use to this day to conclude that smoking probably causes lung cancer. Notice when we say this conclusion, we are not saying that everyone who smokes is bound to get lung cancer. We're not saying smoking is the only cause of lung cancer. We are saying that for some people who habitually smoke, the fact that they smoked caused them to get cancer. For some members of the population, if they had not smoked, they would not have developed lung cancer. And that's not true for all lung cancer patients. There are going to be some people who get lung cancer a different way. There might be other causes of lung cancer. But one way to get lung cancer is to smoke habitually. There also might be some people who smoke and never get lung cancer. That's not a criticism of this argument or this conclusion. We're saying in that case that smoking is a factor that increases your risk of lung cancer, but it doesn't always happen. This is a sort of causal generalization that is saying a bunch of people get lung cancer from smoking, not literally everyone. So something to be on the lookout for. Also, what we just said is directly relevant to this week's discussion board post. So hopefully y'all were listening when I was just saying that. Here's another example of a causal argument. An increase in studying is positively correlated with an increase in test scores. There's no other plausible way to explain this correlation. Therefore, studying more probably causes you to score higher on a test. What are the two things we're comparing in this argument? What are our X and Y? What are our two variables that are correlated in our first premise? What are those two things, y'all? Post in the chat, hit that raise hand button, just unmute yourself. There are a few enough of us in this room right now that I'm fine with you just unmuting yourself. Isabel says an increase in studying and an increase in test scores. I love it. Yep. Studying and test scores is a short way of saying that. And Shanae agrees. I love it. It's exactly right. Studying and test scores. What's our correlation? It's a positive correlation, as it says, literally using the word correlation in that first premise. Increasing studying increases test scores. And our conclusion, in the conclusion, you got the word cause. So, of course, it's that causal claim that studying is the cause, scoring higher on a test is the effect. All right, so we've got some examples of causal arguments. Now let's turn to evaluate these arguments. Reminder, what are the two things we always check whenever we evaluate any argument? This is our thing we always talk about. It's our two tests, our blank test and our blank test. We keep saying it. This is like the fourth time we've talked about it. Isabel was on the trigger, ready for this. So is Lamar. Absolutely. It's truth and support. Those are the two things we care about. Let me get back to this, truth and support. So on the truth test, we want to ask whether the premise is true. And here, notice our premise is always a correlation. One thing you could ask, and it's important to ask when you evaluate causal arguments, is whether you're really dealing with a genuine correlation. A lot of causal arguments go bad because they are describing coincidences, fake patterns, not genuine statistical patterns. So there's a whole website you can go to that's type in spurious correlation that talks about all these really weird coincidental correlations that exist out there. So here's a really interesting one. Did you know there's a strong correlation in the 10 years between 2000 and 2009 between the divorce rate in Maine and the per capita consumption of margarine in the United States? Look at how closely those are correlated. When divorce rate is high, like it is in 2000, the per capita consumption of margarine is pretty high. And then as the divorce rate gets a little bit lower over the next few years, the per capita consumption of margarine also gets a little bit lower. Then it sort of both plateaus a little bit around 2003 to 2004, and then there's a little dip from 2004 to 2005. Then they both go up together, 2006, 2007, 2008, they kind of remain steady. Then they start to slightly dip again in 2009. They look like dance partners. They totally look like a real correlation. But if you know anything about how the world works, you got to know there's no real connection between how many people are getting divorced in Maine and how much margarine is being bought in the United States. There's no plausible story to say that that is a real correlation. That's just the fact that there are so many statistics out there. You could uncover these sorts of correlations that are purely coincidental. Here's another one just to show you this. The number of letters there are in the winning word of a Scripps National Spelling Bee. I don't know if you've ever watched the National Spelling Bee on ESPN, but the number of letters in that word might be like, I don't know, 10 letters, 12 letters, 15 letters, something like that. It correlates pretty highly with the number of people killed by venomous spiders in any given year. So in 1999, it was exactly the same. There were 6 letters in the winning word. There were 6 venomous spiders killed. In 2000, they were pretty close. There was 5 and 4. In 2001, there was sort of a biggest difference, 9 and 5. 2002, it was 11 and 10. 2003, it was 9 and 8. 2004, it was 14 and 13. They both rose together a little bit. And then 11 and 10, etc. There's a pretty strong correlation there, except that's got to be just by random chance. That's got to be just a coincidence. And we want to avoid coincidences like this. We want to be looking for genuine patterns, not just random coincidences like this. Now let's talk about the support. Oh, by the way, the thing you want to ask yourself when you're thinking about this is, could we expect this sort of result just by random chance? What's our base rate? This is also thinking in terms of cardiologists and being immoral. Would we expect to find 30 to 40 articles about cardiologists behaving badly just by random chance alone? And in that case, you would say, yeah, it's just a coincidence. I don't think there's any genuine statistical pattern going on here about cardiologists being immoral, for instance. That's not a genuine correlation. That's just the result of random chance alone. All right, on the support side, the big question we seem to have connecting the premise to the conclusion is whether there is another plausible way to explain the correlation listed in the first premise without drawing the conclusion that X causes Y that we've drawn in our concluding sentence. So here are some alternate ways to explain a correlation between X and Y. One thing you could talk about is a possible common cause. Rather than saying X causes Y, maybe there's a third variable, Z, is both. Causes X and Z also causes Y. So here's a popular example that lots of statisticians like to talk about, lots of critical thinkers like to talk about. It turns out that there is a positive correlation between the amount of ice cream that's sold in a given neighborhood and the amount of crime in that neighborhood. The more ice cream that is sold in a particular neighborhood, the higher the crime rate winds up being in that neighborhood. And also, the less ice cream that's sold in a given neighborhood, the less amount of crime is typically reported in that neighborhood. Do you think that ice cream sales causes crime? Do you think a plausible explanation for that is that ice cream sales is causing crime? Or do you think maybe there's a common cause that explains both? And if there's a common cause, what do you think that common cause might be? Why do you think there's this correlation here in this circumstance? What do you think's going on? Oh, maybe I've stumped y'all. Have I stumped y'all? Why do you think there's a positive correlation between the sale of ice cream and the amount of crime in any particular neighborhood? I like it. I've stumped each and every one of you. So Lamar's going with money. Najua's just going with, well, that's interesting. What do you think's going on here? What else is happening when ice cream sales are going up and ice cream sales are going down? Shantae's thinking it's people stealing ice cream. Nope, it's not even related to ice cream related crime. We're talking about crime in general, like jaywalking and like public indecency and all that sort of stuff. So Facundo says there's something related to heat going on here. Let's think a little bit about this. What's the relationship between the weather and both of these phenomena? When is ice cream sales likely to go up? In the summer. And as Emma is writing here, and also Facundo, crime also goes up in the summer. As Najwa mentioned, summer has the highest rates of crime. So it seems like weather is more likely to be the cause of both. And by the way, the story of the causal link between weather and crime is typically as follows. When it's hot out, people are more likely to be outside. And you know what happens when people are outside? More people are interacting with each other in a public space, the sort of space where police officers can see what people are doing. More often in the winter when it's cold out, people are inside, often in places where police aren't patrolling. They might be in private residences, for instance, more likely to stay inside apartments or houses or the like. And police officers don't have access to the activities that people are doing. So really what's going on when we say there's an increase in crime when it's hotter is that there's an increase in police noticing criminal activity because more people are outside. It's not that more crime's happening, it's that more crime is happening outside in the public as opposed to inside in private residences. There's more reported crime in the summer, not necessarily that there's more crime itself in the summer. So anyway, that's the sort of story that explains there's a common cause going on here. Another sort of less weird, sort of more boring example is that there's a strong correlation between a barometer changing and a storm approaching. If anybody has a barometer, it's a particular like weather device that measures air pressure. You probably saw your barometer change a bunch this morning because a storm was headed our way, at least if you're in North Jersey, around Kane's campus. I actually don't know where all y'all are living right now. Many of you might be remote, so you might be far away. But in North Jersey, it's currently raining on Kane's campus, and a storm was coming this morning. And this morning, the barometer change was pretty significant. There's a pretty significant change in a barometer. What's causing this? Why is there this correlation? It makes no sense to say that the barometer is causing this, but the barometer change actually happens first. Before the storm ever arrives, the barometer starts to flip out. This is why meteorologists like to use barometers. This is why farmers often have barometers, so they know when a storm is coming. And Lamar mentions there might be a temperature drop associated with this. And a temperature drop is essentially, in meteorology terms, an air pressure change. When you go from a high front to a cool front, when you go from like hot air pressure to cold air pressure, that change results in a storm. That's two different types of electron levels clashing with each other that's causing lightning to be discharged. because the air pressure is so different in one location versus the other. And when they clash like that, a storm happens. But when they clash like that, the barometer is also changing because you're going from either high to low or from low to high in this way. All right, so one of the things you want to look for in fancy statistical terms is confounding variables that explains your common cause. That says, yeah, there's a correlation between X and Y, but we can explain it by this confounding variable. All right, the other way you could explain this is to go reverse. And you're saying X causes Y in the traditional conclusion, but maybe actually what's going on is that Y is the cause and X is the effect, not vice versa. Maybe we flipped cause and effect. So here's a common sort of legit statistical correlation. Stress and acne are correlated among teenagers in the United States. The more stress a teenager has is associated with more amount of acne in that teenager. And one thing you might ask is either sort of cause-effect question. Does stress cause acne, or does acne cause stress? And interestingly, I think you can tell a plausible story in both directions. Maybe when someone gets stressed, they're more focused on their emotional state of mind, less focused on their physical state, and they might be less likely to do the sorts of hygienic things needed to deal with acne, and so that stress causes them to have more acne as a result. Or maybe the reverse happens. Maybe somebody who's a teenager who has a lot of acne in a sort of appearance-based society that we live in that thinks of acne as some sort of blemish, that's some sort of mark on someone's beauty, might wind up getting stressed because they have acne, because they're not living up to that standard of beauty and appearances that people expect of them. So that's a story that would say that acne causes stress. Both stories make a lot of sense, but just from the correlation alone that we're aware of, that there's a correlation between stress and acne, we don't know which story makes the most sense, which story is the most plausible of the two explanations, which is the cause and which is the effect. So these are the things you want to be on the lookout for whenever you're evaluating cause and effect arguments. You want to be on the lookout for whether you've got a genuine correlation or a coincidence. You want to be on the lookout for whether we're dealing with a common cause, a third variable that causes both X and Y. And you want to make sure you've got the cause and the effect in the right order. Cause comes first, effect comes second. Cause brings about the effect. Maybe you should try flipping it sometimes to check whether the effect really is the cause. And the thing you're calling the cause really is the effect. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about this, let's take a look at this week's participation activity, which I can pull up right here. Not this one. Where's this week's participation activity? I got to pull it up. I guess I didn't actually pull it up on here. Give me a mini second to pull this up. Here it is. Ta-da! So this week's participation activity is all about causal arguments. And for each one of these, this is continuing to look familiar for you, I hope. What I want you to do is tell me what are the two things that are being correlated, how they're being correlated in the premises, what's the cause and effect conclusion that we're drawing, and then you can evaluate the truth and the support of this argument. First, by truth, you're figuring out whether the correlation is a genuine correlation or a fake pattern. People refer to fake patterns as spurious. That's a fancy word that just means fake. So whether we're dealing with a genuine correlation or a spurious correlation, a fake pattern. And then on the support side, we're talking about whether you could explain it some other way. Either you could refer to the cause and effect as being reversed, or maybe there's a common cause, some Z factor that causes both X and Y, or maybe you're dealing with actually good support. The conclusion makes the most sense. Based off of what you circle under truth and support, that will help you determine whether you circle good or bad for this overall quality of the argument. Overall, are we saying this is a good argument or a bad argument? To count as a good argument, it's got to pass the truth and support test. It's got to be both genuine truth and good support. If you say anything bad under truth and support, like spurious or reversed or common cause, that's when you would circle bad. And notice there's space for you to do a little bit of explaining for why it is you circled something bad. If you circle anything bad here, if you circle spurious, explain why. If you circle reversed, explain why. If you circle common cause, explain why. There's not a lot of space to explain, so I'm not looking for super long explanations, just a little explanation like this. So here's the example from the top right here. We can talk through. Shanae, go ahead and unmute yourself.
So this is due during class, correct?
There is a separate in-class activity we're going to do starting in like 5 minutes.
Okay.
This is your participation activity for this week.
For the class?
This is the thing it's due Wednesday.
Okay, so when we do the class participation, are we all doing it together or we have to do it separate, like on our time?
I'll be talking us through what it is we have to do in 5 minutes. Okay. Essentially, I'm going to ask you to get into groups and go for like just 3 minutes of group work over something. That's nothing you have to hand in. That's nothing that's graded. It's just something we're doing in the middle of class today.
Okay.
And that is this thing, the thing that's listed as ungraded live session activity. That's different from this participation activity. These are typical participation activities that I grade, that you hand in, just based on whether you do them or don't do them. Good question. Sorry I was confusing. Happy to clarify in this way. All right, so here's the example argument to just sort of walk through this. Teenagers who use marijuana weekly are twice as likely to be depressed and 3 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts than teenagers who don't use marijuana. Therefore, don't let your teens smoke marijuana. In this case, it looks like the 2 things we're correlating are using pot and mental health in teens specifically. Using marijuana weekly and things like depression, things like suicidal thoughts. Those are mental health concerns. Those are the 2 things that we are correlating. The particular way in which they're correlated seems to be that we are dealing with an inverse correlation, which is just a fancy word for the opposite of a positive correlation, like a negative correlation. The more someone uses pot, the more pot is increased. That seems to be associated with worse mental health going down. If both were going up in a positive direction, it'd be a positive correlation. When one goes up and the other goes down, that is a negative correlation. They're going in opposite directions, or inverse correlation. And the conclusion we're drawing from this is that it looks like we're saying that the smoking of weed is the cause and the effect is the mental health problems. We're saying smoking weed causes these mental health problems. Well, it turns out this is a genuine correlation. Teens who smoke a lot are more likely to be depressed and more likely to have suicidal thoughts. That is a genuine correlation. But it seems like a plausible story is to reverse the cause and the effect in this argument. Rather than saying weed causes the mental health problems, you might plausibly say that people who have these sorts of mental health problems might be more likely to want to self-medicate by trying some sort of recreational drug like marijuana. The pain itself is what's causing the pot use, not the pot use causing the pain. Seems like that reverse might be a more plausible way to explain this correlation, and that's why this is a bad argument. So that's the exact sort of thing I want you to do for each of these. I think there are 8 total causal arguments on this worksheet. Take a look at every one of them and try each one of them out yourself to figure out all of these columns for each one of these. Questions, thoughts, concerns about this participation activity? This is the one participation activity you have to do this week that's due Wednesday. The other thing you got to do this week is 1 post in the discussion board. Questions, thoughts, or concerns? Lamar's got no questions. Oh. Couple other no's. I like it. Thank you for noping on my behalf. I appreciate it. Cool. So here's what I'm going to do now. Let's start talking about the last type of argument we're learning about in class today. These types of arguments are called arguments from authority. Let me share it to you all super big like. Here we go. Arguments from authority. And based off of this, we are going to now do our 3-minute group work in class ungraded activity. That's going to be based off of this sheet that you can find on Blackboard. So this is going to be awkward because the way I'm going to get you into groups means you're going to be leaving this particular live session for about 3 minutes, and then I'm going to ask you to come back to this live session at the end of these 3 minutes. And what I want you to focus on when you go to your breakout rooms is this particular handout in the Unit 7 folder, this in-class ungraded activity. I'm going to give each group one particular argument to focus on to discuss in 3 minutes. So there are 4 total arguments on here. I don't want you to look at all 4 of the arguments. I just want the first 2 groups to focus on this argument about the death penalty to the left here. And I want groups 3 and 4 to focus on this one about sister cracking your cell phone. And I want groups 5 and 6 to focus on this argument to the left, and groups 7 and 8 to focus on this argument to the bottom right. You're going to spend 3 minutes just thinking about whether you think this is a good argument or a bad argument. And you're going to try to come up with a little bit of reasoning for why you think it's a good argument, and you would circle trusty if you think it's a good argument, or why you think it's a bad argument, and you would circle shady. Again, you can find this under our Unit 7 live session right here. It's also at the very bottom of the Unit 7 folder if you want to pull that up yourself. The reason why I'm asking you to pull it up yourself now is because in about a minute, when we break up into these groups, you're not going to be able to see this that I've pulled up right now on your screen. You're going to have to see it yourself in your own separate group. So please go ahead and pull that up. Now, let me tell you how it is I'm going to get you into these groups. Who's in group 1? Who's in group 2? Well, it turns out you've already been put into these groups. These are the groups that you've been assigned to for those group projects toward the end of the semester on fallacies. If you remember, on the very bottom of the left side of this course menu bar is a little My Groups tab. When you click on that My Groups tab, it lets you know what group you're in. It should say group 1 or group 4 or whatever group. I would like all of you to on that group, whatever it is, and then click on Collaborate right under that group. And when you click on Collaborate, it will bring you to a page where you are looking at a separate room. It's a room just for your group, just for you and your other group members. And this is based, if you remember, on the group project. This is the groups. So group 1 is going to be David, Emma, and Facundo. Group 2 are these 4 students. Group 3, group 4, etc. This has already been assigned to you. You should already naturally just be in these groups. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to navigate your way to the whatever Collaborate page, then join your group room for the next 3 minutes. So somebody just posted in here before you all leave. Yes, good. Monique asked, what time do we come back? So I've got 10:49. Let's round this up and say 10:50. I want you to just do this for 3 minutes. So I would like you to come back at 10:53. Come back to this room, to this all-class live session at 10:53. So go ahead and go into your rooms now and just focus on the one argument you've been assigned to be focused on. Whatever that one argument is. If you're group 1, it's this one. Group 3 or 4, this one, etc. I'll see you in 3 minutes, y'all. Yeah, you can leave this room and join your other room for 3 minutes, Monique. If you can do both at the same time, you can stay here if you want. But for most of you, it's going to be leaving this room and coming back. All right. Now that it's 10:54, hopefully y'all are starting to come back. I'm going to give everybody about 1 minute to come back. We had 20 of us at the start, so I'm hoping that we'll still have 20 of us who are rejoining us. I'm seeing a few of us rejoin, which is nice. Any of y'all get into groups where there was nobody else there? I apologize if that happened to you. Statistically speaking, I'm guessing there might be one group that only had one, maybe 2 members. Any of you have full force? Oh, sorry, Isabel, no one joined your group? Well, you're going to be the lone representative of your group today. That's really frustrating. I apologize. I'm trying to get you all. I mean, I could have just like broken you up randomly into groups, I suppose, but I like the idea of you continuing to work together with your group project partners, or your group members. And Olivia's missing someone from her group as well. Ugh. Did you at least have one person in your group with Olivia? One other person, that is, aside from yourself? All right, Emma had at least two people in there, in Emma's group. So that's something. All right, most of us have returned. It's all but one person, and hopefully they'll return in a minute. Now what we're going to do is start to go over these. Let me switch over because I got slides for these. Slide time. So let's talk about this first argument, and this is for groups 1 and groups 2. What did you all say? Did you all say that this argument is a trusty argument, or did you all go with shady? Shanae, go ahead and unmute yourself.
So group 2, we decided that it's both because even though people understand the death penalty and, you know, if you kill somebody in extensive like kills, you are like in the death penalty, but people still do it nowadays. So I feel like it is shady. Like it doesn't really put fear on people like, oh, you know, if you get the death penalty, you are a murderer, like, you know, so it doesn't really bring fear to the situation. However, once they realize that they do get the death penalty because they kill people, they are becoming fearful that they are going to die.
Awesome. I like that. That's a nice analysis. So you can see a little bit of on the one hand, on the other hand, for group number 2, it sounded like. Emma, are you going to be our spokesperson for group number 1? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we said it was shady because although like the argument logically like makes sense, like what Shanae was saying, the source is not exactly trustworthy. I mean, how much does like a 4-year-old know about the criminal justice system? So it was more of a shady thing mostly because of the source.
Awesome. So this is a good way of thinking about this, and I like both what Shanae said and what Emma put forward here. Okay, Helen's asking to be a perhaps spokesperson for group 3 when we get to it, which we'll get to in a minute. But I like this way of thinking about it, right? So one thing you could do when you see an argument like this is focus on the conclusion and say, does this conclusion make sense? And I think Shanae did a really nice job of pointing out that this conclusion, among the experts, people who are trying to figure out whether the death penalty deters or not, this is a classic sort of hard to figure out issue. And there are experts on both sides of this issue. Some experts who have done a bunch of research that they say confirms that the death penalty does deter murder, and other researchers who say that their evidence confirms the opposite, that the death penalty has no impact on the murder rate. So this is a hard to figure out conclusion. But now let's think about what Emma said. Emma said that whether this conclusion is true or not is separate from whether this argument with the premise about your 4-year-old brother telling you that the death penalty deters murder is a good argument for that conclusion or not a good argument for the conclusion. So Olivia can't hear me. How about everybody else? Can others hear me? Feel free to write yes or no in here. All right. So it looks like a lot of people can hear me. Sorry, Olivia, that you're having issues. Perhaps you want to like go out and come back in. It might be, yeah, go ahead, Olivia. Yeah, sorry about that. But so this is exactly why we're talking about this particular argument, because we're going to talk about arguments from authority right now. An argument from authority is the following sort of argument. The entire evidence for the conclusion is that there's some source, a person, a textbook, a news article, some source is saying that claim is true, and that's the entire evidence you have for the truth of that conclusion or that claim. So in this case, the entire evidence we have for this conclusion that the death penalty deters murder is that your 4-year-old brother is telling you that. And I like what Emma said here. I think in this particular case, as Emma pointed out, a 4-year-old probably doesn't know a lot about the criminal justice system, about whether the death penalty has a deterrent effect or lacks a deterrent effect. 4-year-olds aren't the sort of people who are reliable, trustworthy sources on such a complicated issue as that. So in this case, I would say that our source is shady. Our source is not a trustworthy source, but is instead a shady source, an unreliable source. In this case, a source that lacks competence. By competence, in this particular case, we mean the sort of source who's likely to know the answer, who's likely to say, yeah, that's true, or that is not true. Now, I don't think I asked any of you all to do this next one, but I'm gonna check with you all real quick. I'm gonna ask you to do a poll, or you could feel free to just write in the chat. Do you think this source is a trustworthy source, or is this source a shady source? So in this case, we're talking about MIT linguist Noam Chomsky. I'm putting up a little, what would you call it, poll right now for you to try out. Tell me what you think in this poll that hopefully should have just popped up to you. Do you think the source of, it's the same conclusion, right? The death penalty deters murder. Do you think this particular professor of linguistics, Noam Chomsky, is a reliable source, a trustworthy source? Are you going trusty? You do a little T for trusty. Are you going to go shady? You can just like shake your finger, wag your finger no for shady on this one. All right. So we got 4 votes for trusty, 2 votes for shady, 3 votes for shady, 3 votes for I'm not sure. Oh, it's just switched. It's 3 votes for trusty, 5 votes for shady, and 2 for I'm not sure. Emma is saying that she thinks this source is shady because our source is a linguist. Linguists are the sort of professors who study language, the meaning of words, the semantics of words, sentence structure, and the like. And Emma says that that particular area of focus has nothing to do with the death penalty. Interesting. So now we've got, I think, because maybe many people have rather read Emma or are thinking about it a little bit more, most of us went with shady on this one. I think also this is a shady source, even though Noam Chomsky is far more competent a source than a 4-year-old. His competence or expertise is on a different subject matter, the subject matter of language, not the subject matter of the death penalty. Facundo writes here, the expert needs to be a professional in the field they are referencing. At the very least, if we're just trusting this source on and just trusting this source alone on the topic, we want to be able to check that source's credentials. Is that source the sort of person who's likely to know the answer? Excellent. I'm going to get rid of this poll now. Awesome. So now I think we can go to another set of groups. Is this group 3 and 4? I forget. No, this is groups 5 and 6. So I've flipped up to group 9, 5, and 6. So anybody in those 2 groups, tell me what you think about this argument. Your 9-year-old sister tells you that today is Friday. Is that good evidence that today's Friday? Do you trust your sister? You're going to go with trusty or shady? Go ahead, Isabel.
So originally I thought that it would be shady because your sister would be too young to be trustworthy. But then I was thinking about it and I'm like, well, a 9-year-old is like 3rd, 4th grade, maybe. So I feel like they might have a concept of what day of the week it is. I feel like I did at that point, and that's what I was going off of. So now I'm kind of confused.
Good. So you're not willing to fully endorse trusty, but you're backing off your initial shady result on this. Awesome. What group were you in, Isabel, by the way? What was your group number?
I was group 6.
Okay. So how about our group 5 people? Maybe we can gain some clarity there. Go ahead, Lamar. Unmute yourself.
I agree with what, I'm sorry, was it Isabel? With what she said?
Yeah.
And I'm in group 5, and at that age, I understood the concept of the days of the week, and I was also able to, in understanding it, like you can corroborate the days of the week with, what you have to do for the day. And I trust my
Mhm.
sister to make that decision. Um, so I, it's more trusty than shady. So I would say shady. I'm not 100%
Okay,
sold, but I would say more trusty than shady.
nice. Yeah, so I like your like a little bit of skepticism, Lamar, in there, but you're gonna lean towards shady. And I really like the analysis that both of y'all are putting forward here, right? You might initially think like, well, what the hell does a 9-year-old know? 9-year-olds are dumb about all sorts of things. But then the more you think about it, like this is kind of an easy topic, right? This is the sort of topic that we might expect a 9-year-old to get. So I think this is a competent source. I meant it to be Friday the whole time. Sorry that it switched to Wednesday. I didn't update all my slides correctly. I think a 9-year-old is likely to know the day of the week. I do think a 9-year-old is competent in this way, in exactly the way that Isabel was sort of walking towards, and in exactly the way that Lamar sort of more confidently asserted. 9-year-olds know the days of the week. At least most 9-year-olds do. Again, Lamar, it's a good thing that you said, like, well, maybe not 100%, because remember, these aren't deductive arguments. These arguments are always going to have, again, this sort of like probably conclusion. Our source is telling us this, so that claim is probably true, not 100% guaranteed to be true. So one big aspect of evaluating any of these sorts of arguments, where the whole evidence is that a source says it, so it's probably true, is whether the source is competent, whether the source is likely to know the answer. And this idea of being likely to know shouldn't be construed as absolute expertise, having an advanced degree, being a scholar, being a professional. It just means the source is the sort of person who probably knows the answer. So in this particular case, what do you all think? This is another one where I don't think I asked anybody to do this one. I want to make sure. Now, I didn't ask any of y'all to do this one. Do you think you have a new friend named Johanna who tells you that her middle name is Rose? Do you think that's a trustworthy source, or is that a shady source? I've got a new poll for you to do. I'm seeing everybody write in the chat anyway, but feel free to take the poll as well if you want to go back to that poll. But yeah, all are saying trusty in this particular case of it. Yeah, I think this one is pretty clearly trusty. And I'm going to cut the voting off, but everybody who voted, it's a 9-0 sweep. Y'all are going with trusty in this circumstance for exactly the reasons that I would as well. I think you're likely to know your middle name. Anybody is likely to know their middle name outside of like super young toddlers, right? Who maybe haven't learned their full names yet. So awesome. Everybody right now, start writing in the chat. What are some topics where you're a trusty source, where you're a competent source, where you're quote unquote an expert, an informed, reliably competent source who's likely to know the answer on that? And special like bonus to anybody who can say something you're competent on that maybe others might not be competent on. So for instance, a topic that I know a lot about would be, say, like my sister's favorite food. That would be something that I'm likely to know because I talk to my sister a lot and I know what type of food she likes and doesn't like, for instance. Write in the chat, unmute yourself. Tell me some topics right now where you're competent towards that. This isn't something where you need an advanced degree, something where you just know the answer. You're likely to know the answer. So Olivia says the dates of your family's birthdays, own birthday. For sure. I don't know any of y'all's birthdays, but I bet y'all know your own birthdays. So Facundo has a really fancy like microbiological fact. Very cool. Facundo, you just happen to have a background in bacterial microbiology. That's awesome. Facundo takes the cake. Yeah, Lamar. Helen knows how weird her sister is. I like that. Yeah, you might be able to explain all the different intricacies of your sister in ways that probably the rest of us can't. Lamar knows a lot about the Chicago Bears, probably as a Bears fan, I'm guessing. Helen, go ahead, unmute yourself.
just
I am
know,
not weird, I promise.
as soon as you said that, my sister jumped up from the bed and she goes, "Excuse me."
I am not weird.
So she's been listening this whole time, and she didn't know
Yeah.
that you were calling out your sister. Oh, good. I like that. We have a lurker among us. I appreciate this back and forth, Helen. Helen, what's your sister's name?
Haiti.
Her name's Haiti.
Hi, Haiti. Sorry that we are probably, this isn't the best background noise, hearing a random critical thinking class. But
Famous.
I couldn't hear what Haiti just said. What did
She
she
said,
say?
"You guys are talking about me. Wow, I'm famous."
That's right, yeah. Yeah, you're an influencer now. Congratulations, Haiti.
As I should.
Awesome. All right, so Emma knows a lot about brain surgery because she has experienced it. Really nice example. Facundo actually does research in STEM, which means that explains why he knows a lot about bacterial transformation. Awesome. Monique knows particularly artists and music groups in Asia, like Korean artists, some Chinese music songs and artists. I know a good amount about Asian culture. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good example. So if we wanted to know some more about artists and music groups in Asia, maybe Monique would be our source in this class. Certainly more than me. I don't know, outside of a few K-pop and J-pop groups, I don't know that much about the art and music in Asia. So awesome. Good examples all. Now let's go to, I think it's groups 3 and 4. This argument where your 9-year-old sister tells you that she didn't crack your cell phone screen. Does that mean it's probably true that your sister didn't crack your cell phone screen? All right, Helen, you're the spokesperson for your group. Go ahead.
So I found that to be shady. Oh, I'm also in group 3, but I found that to be shady because honestly, like, she might just be telling you that she didn't crack it just so she won't get in trouble, or so that like you won't tell like your mom that like she cracked her screen herself. I know my sister wouldn't tell me. She'd be like, yeah, somebody else dropped it. And I recently cracked my entire screen, so I'm a little upset.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
this was triggering
that.
for you. Okay,
Yeah,
that was
I
on
like
you,
looked
not
over at my
you.
phone and I saw the screen.
Yeah, so really good explanation here. Let me just quickly check who's our other group aside from 3 and 4. Group 4. Somebody from group 4 want to tell us what your thoughts about this? I think Helen did a really nice job, but somebody in group 4 help us out here. I'll call you out by name. It's Amanda, Ashla, and Iris. I should actually check to see whether any of y'all are even here. Well, Amanda's here, Ashla's here, and no Iris. So it's going to be either Amanda or Ashla. You can post in the chat or unmute yourself. Go ahead, Amanda. So I can't hear you, Amanda. I'm not sure if anyone else can. Try to unmute yourself again. Okay, cool. You'll just do it in the chat. Sorry. Yeah, so mics don't work sometimes. That's fine. So what would you say is going on in this argument? Would you agree it's shady in the same way Helen was talking about it? Or are you going to buck the trend and say it's trusty? So Amanda said, we basically said the same thing because it's very easy for the child to lie. I think this is an important added wrinkle here. A source might be competent, might know the answer to the question you're trying to figure out, but might not be sincere, right? Both Helen and Amanda are saying in this case, there's a reason that your sister might lie in this circumstance. Franco in the chat wrote, I read something before that someone's brother broke the TV, but he lied that he was playing baseball the whole day, right? Yeah, particularly when the topic is about whether you did something good or bad, you might have a motive to lie about that, to look good to others, to not look bad to others. In this case, your sister, whether she did it or didn't do it, would have a motive to tell you she didn't do it, because that motive is she doesn't want to get in trouble. So let's think about, I don't think I asked anyone to do this one, which is interesting as a flip. So this is an example of a commercial where Selena Gomez, who is a somewhat well-known musical artist, and I guess actor, claims that Pantene makes your hair stronger. What do y'all think in this circumstance? You think this is trusty? You think this is shady? We got 1 vote for shady, 2 votes for shady. I'm not even going to do the polling anymore. I'll just keep it this way. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Who is that? Helen, go ahead.
I agree with Shantae when she was like she gets paid, because artists get paid all the time just to like be on a commercial or like promote a product. So it's definitely more like Pantene was like, hey, here, use this, tell them it's good for you. And yeah.
Yeah. And getting paid in this case is just another way of saying she has a motive to lie. Whether she likes Pantene or doesn't like Pantene, she's going to say Pantene is great because she's getting paid to say Pantene is great. That's just another way of saying she's got a motive to lie. Now, she might actually believe it, right? And by the way, going back a step, your sister might actually not have cracked your cell phone screen. But the very fact that your sister has a motive to lie means she's a shady source in this circumstance. The very fact that Selena Gomez is getting paid as a spokesperson to say this means she's not a good, trusty, reliable source. Instead, she's shady. And it's not just Selena Gomez. I don't want to pick on just one pop star. It's anybody endorsing any product in any advertisement. I don't know why I got all British there. In any advertisement. Any commercial, any ad that you see, that is an insincere source. That's people getting paid to say positive things about that product. So aside from competence, we also care about sincerity. Does the source have a sincere, truthful motive? That is, having no motive to lie and be fake or dishonest. That's something we care about. So let's talk a little bit about an example like this now. Tell me what you think. I don't think I asked any of y'all to do this one. Yeah, I did not. Facebook COO, Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg claims their additional security operation hires will make Facebook more secure. Do you think that's a trustworthy source in this circumstance? They now trust that, yeah, I guess Facebook security operation hires will make them more secure. You going with trusty on this one? You going with shady? Oh, getting fewer people quick to the trigger on this one. Maybe I'll set it up as a poll. All right, I just did it as a new poll. Feel free to take this new poll. If you click on the button next to the raise hand button, that little graph or chart button, you can start voting. You maybe don't want to be as public about this. All right, we got 4 people who have voted so far, 5 people, 6 people. All right, 9 of us have voted so far. Right now, we've got 3 people who have voted shady and 3 people who voted trusty and 10 people who have voted shady. So looks like we're going towards shady on this one. I agree. I think there's something shady here. What's shady in this particular circumstance? Why is she a shady source? Why aren't we trusting Sheryl Sandberg here? She's the COO of Facebook. Shouldn't she know? So Lamar says she has to say that. I like what you're saying here, Lamar. Say more about that. What do you mean she has to say that? Right? She's got to do this because she's trying to portray a positive image of her company to the people who own stock in her company, right? To her shareholders. She's got to give the Facebook spin, right? As the Facebook spokesperson. Yeah, and so Isabel says, I don't think a company would tell you their site was not secure. Yeah, so there's some, even if Facebook isn't secure, the people on Facebook are likely to say we've got a good, secure system. And so she has a motive to lie in this circumstance. Again, just like we were talking about with Selena Gomez and your 9-year-old sister who may or may not have cracked your cell phone screen, she has a motive. Here's another sort of concern, though, I want to point out here. Do you think Sheryl Sandberg is fully unbiased? Yeah, and Lamar is saying she definitively can't. She can't definitely guarantee this as well. Always a good point, right? But I think the other concern is that she might not be fully unbiased and impartial in this circumstance. And unbiased and impartial is separate from sincerity. Even if Sheryl Sandberg genuinely believes this, genuinely thinks this is going to make a difference, she has devoted a lot of her life to Facebook. She is at the top or almost at the top of Facebook. So she has a clear pro-Facebook bias. She is more likely to say positive, supportive things about the company she's so dedicated and devoted to. And that bias might distort her judgment in this circumstance. She might genuinely believe that these hires are going to make Facebook more secure, but she's not really seeing the issue from a particularly good, unbiased perspective. So in addition to sincerity, we also want to be sure that our sources are unbiased. We want to make sure our sources don't have any possible allegiances that could distort their judgment in one way or another. And for what it's worth, actually, we'll get to that next. I won't say this one thing next, but these are the three pillars of evaluating arguments from authority. Check the source just on whether they're knowledgeable, they're likely to know, whether they're sincere or have a motive to lie, and whether they're unbiased or have a possible distorting bias in their judgment. All right, we've got our final two groups talking about this one. This is group 7 and 8. Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, during this nominee hearing, said that Trump's Supreme Court Justice nominee from last year, Brett Kavanaugh, is unfit to be a judge. So do you think that's true based off of that this is a good argument? Group 7, Group 8, I want to hear from y'all. What did y'all say? If I could call you out by name, we're talking about Anaya, we're talking about Franco, we're talking about Najwa. That's just Group 7 alone. I also want to shout out Barbara, Onel, Sam. Any one of y'all tell us, did you say trusty? Did you say shady? So Najwa is going with shady. Did your other group members also say that? Looks like Franco agreed as well. So at least the two of you agreed with shady. Why? Feel free to either write in the chat or unmute yourself. I think there's something possibly shady going on here as well. What might be shady in this circumstance? All right, so Franco's talking about personal opinions in this circumstance. So let's think a little bit about this, and we can frame the idea of personal opinions in terms of bias. What might be possibly biased about our source's opinion here? Our source is Amy Klobuchar. Our source is a senator who's a Democrat. Why might that be a possible bias in this circumstance? What might be the bias that's distorting her judgment here? You got to know a little bit about politics to know the possible bias here. But why might a Democrat be biased against this particular Supreme Court justice nominee? So Emma says the fact that he's Republican, or perhaps the fact that he is nominated by a Republican president, right? And as Anaya says here, Klobuchar wants her own party in the position. She would prefer that maybe a Democratic president nominate a Democratic justice rather than a more conservative, potentially Republican justice. And as Najwa says, because she's saying that because she wants to make him look bad. That's why she's saying that, for her to look good so she can be, or at least seem, more knowledgeable. Yeah, so that's a possible distorting judgment in this circumstance. Her party loyalty to being a Democrat may be distorting her judgment in this circumstance. She might be likely to say that about any nominee that a Republican president puts forward to the Supreme Court. Not just Brett Kavanaugh, but whomever gets put forward. And you could see that perhaps this week during Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings. Perhaps Amy Klobuchar said similar things this week that she did 2 years ago in Brett Kavanaugh's one. So these are the things that we care about. One thing I want to say is that from the outside, this is the thing I was waiting to say, sincerity and bias can be hard to distinguish. Whether you know somebody is lying to you or whether you know somebody is thinking they're saying the truth, but their judgment is distorted, can be hard to know from the outside. So I often think of sincerity and lack of bias as like 2A and 2B. They fall under the same heading. Sometimes you're going to have to say like, well, she's either insincere or she's unbiased, or, well, I think this source is both sincere and unbiased, something along the lines of that. It's sometimes hard from the outside to know which is which. Because really the difference between lying and being biased is like whether you are knowingly lying to others, where you know the answer, but others don't, or whether in some sense you're kind of lying to yourself, where you've tricked yourself into believing something that's not that reasonable because your loyalties have led you to confirmation bias to agree with something that might not be that plausible. All right, so actually, I think now might be a good time to call it for the day. So we're going to continue talking about arguments from authority all next week. Literally everything next week is looking at a variety of different arguments from authority because they are so common in everyday life. The reason why you read the news or watch the news is because that's supposed to be a competent, sincere, unbiased source. So we're going to examine news sources from the perspective of arguments from authority. The reason why you might trust science might be because you think of scientists, by and large, as competent, sincere, and unbiased. And that's a way that we get a lot of our understanding of the world, is just by trusting science and trusting scientists. That's another whole section of arguments from authority. So a lot of what we'll be doing next week is examining all the different types of arguments from authority that are out there in the news, in individuals, in science. We'll be looking at all of that. But before we leave, a reminder for what's due this week. If I can go back to this, where are we at? Right at the top. The stuff you got to do for class this week in Unit 7, the discussion post. Take your time. I'll just flip it to here. Your one post in this discussion board, that's due Wednesday. And then this participation activity on causal arguments, also due Wednesday. You don't have to hand in this argument from authority we just did. You don't have to do anything related to that. That's not graded. It was just something I wanted to do to spur us to think about this. The only two things you got are the participation activity and the discussion board. All right, that's it for today. Good to see all of y'all. Have yourselves an excellent weekend, everybody. Take it easy. Bye, y'all.